Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is the Child Sex Trafficking Team in the Office of the Governor's first webinar of 2022. I'm sure many of you are familiar with our team if you got this registration link, but our team is housed in the Governor's Public Safety Office. We were created by the 84th Legislature to really ensure a comprehensive response to survivors of child sex trafficking across the state. My name is Todd Ladiolis. I'm the administrator for the Child Sex Trafficking Team. So I provide direct oversight for our small and mighty team and also our strategies here in the governor's office. We have really the privilege and good fortune in Texas, I think, to have a number of state agencies that are doing outstanding work and that are collaborating and coordinating with one another to address human trafficking from all angles. So we reached out to our good friends at the Texas Alcoholic Beverage Commission, TABC, because we wanted you all to hear from them about really the key role that they play in stopping human trafficking from taking place in all sorts of licensed establishments that they regulate: bars, nightclubs, convenience stores, and others. So I'm really happy to be joined today by several team members from TABC. We have Nick Raymond, who is the Director of Government Relations. We have Chief Brandy Norris, who is the Chief of Enforcement, Deputy Chief Ron Swenson, who is the Deputy Chief of Enforcement, and Rachel Alvarez, who is a Victim Service Coordinator. So just a couple of housekeeping things before I pass it on. You as an attendee are muted. You'll be in listen-only mode for the duration of this webinar. You do have the opportunity to use a question box. If you have any questions during the webinar, we'll be sure to facilitate a little Q&A at the end of the presentation. And because we always get the question about access after the webinar, yes, we are recording the webinar, so assuming no technical glitches, we will be emailing out a link to that recording to everyone who registered to attend today. And we'll also be sharing a PDF of the PowerPoint to accompany that as well. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Nick Raymond.
Great. Thanks, Todd. Thanks for the introduction, and pleasure to be here today. Just to kind of discuss our mission here at the agency. We serve the people of the Texas and protect the public health and safety through the consistent and fair and timely administration of the Alcoholic Beverage Code. We're the sole regulator of all alcohol licenses. I think the slide shows 58,000. I think that's actually up in the 63,000 to date. So going through the process of approvals and ensuring compliance is a big piece of keeping the businesses thriving and the consumers safe at the same time. Back in the 86th legislative session, there was a House bill that recognized the agency and sought to make sure every program area and function of the agency was reviewed. And through that, it was evident that we were a contributor to preventing human trafficking. So since then, we've been part of both state, local, and federal organizations and partnerships to get in and leverage our unique tools to fight human trafficking.
You know, Nick, before you move on to the slide, this is Ron Swenson. I'm the Deputy Chief over the Enforcement Division. And prior to this position, I was the Major over our Special Investigations Unit, which we started in 2013. And every agent, every employee of TABC focuses on human trafficking, but our Special Investigations Unit took on that role heavily when that last legislative session, the 86th legislative session, made human trafficking one of our #1 priority. And it really wasn't a shock to me that they asked us to look at human trafficking since we had been fighting organized crime since the inception of the agency. If you go into our alcoholic beverage code, one of the first chapters talks about the prohibition and why our agency was created. And it was created to keep organized crime from taking hold, money laundering, narcotics, bootlegging, of course, which was, the initial concept of the agency. But that morphed from bootlegging alcohol into selling drugs. And of course, criminals are going to do anything to make money. So they're not just selling drugs, but they're going to also, if they can make money, selling women or labor trafficking, et cetera. And because the alcoholic beverage industry is such a cash intensive business, it's easy to hide or commingle your illegal proceeds with your legal proceeds. And the agency has really embraced that duty to help fight that organized crime and keep it out of the alcoholic beverage industry. And one of our unique tools, as Nick said, we are kind of a unique agency because we have administrative and criminal enforcement authority. Most law enforcement agencies are criminal. They go in and they arrest the bad guys. We can go in and, of course, arrest the bad guys too. But we have that extra authority where we can actually shut down the business. And I think that improves quality of life. I think it affects the community as a whole. And it has a lasting impact where going in and, putting a couple people in jail, rescuing some victims, of course, those are all highly, highly important and very valuable. But we have that added tool in our toolbox to affect the business. And in certain cases, human trafficking being one of them, actually prevent another licensed location from coming into that location for up to a year. So it's a very powerful tool that we can use there with that administrative authority. Chief Norris, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, I think you did a great job of kind of explaining why we do what we do and what our authority is to do what we do. Since 2013, we have shut down more than 100 businesses suspected of engaging in organized crime, including prostitution, narcotics, and even human trafficking. So unfortunately, it's an issue that we do deal with on a regular basis. As time goes and we work through the investigations and we figure out and are exposed to new things, we figure out better ways to address them. Unfortunately, we also anticipate that as time goes, this number is going to increase. It's anticipated that the issue will continue and that the issue will become more problematic.
Absolutely. Next slide.
True. I'm going to move to the next slide now for Deputy Chief Swenson's and I's involvement with the Human Trafficking Prevention Coordinating Council and Task Force. Do you want to keep rolling with that, Deputy Chief?
Sure. We are honored, proud to be part of the task force. I think it's probably, I sit on multiple task forces with the Violent Gang Task Force, Joint Terrorism Task Force, Underwater Basket Weaving Task Force. There's all kinds of them out there, but this is one that hasn't been in existence very long, and I think has made some huge strides in improving some laws, creating networking. We call it networking. We can call it collaboration. Really what it is it's relationship building. And I'll talk a little bit about that. Well, with our law enforcement partners, I mean, we are the third largest law enforcement, state law enforcement agency in Texas. But relatively speaking, it's a big state, and we have approximately one certified police officer per county. So yeah, we got 250 police officers, agents working for us. But when you consider how big the state of Texas is, that we really don't have a lot. So the only way we can do that is to collaborate with our law enforcement partners. DPS, we're constantly working with them, local police departments, sheriff's departments. We've also, as a force multiplier, put a lot of our agents with FBI, Safe Streets, DEA task forces, Homeland Security, the TAG groups, the Texas anti-gang groups that are strategically stood up across the state. We try to embed agents there. HATRA down in Houston, the Human Trafficking Rescue Alliance, we're a very active partner with them. Have a few agents sitting over there working with them on a regular basis. So being part of these task forces is the force multiplier. And I don't know the quote exactly, but J. Edgar Hoover said something to the effect of the most powerful enforcement tool is cooperation, sharing of information. And that's exactly what we're trying to do here, is be a resource for other law enforcement agencies and other task forces, and let them also be a resource to us, because they provide a lot of things that we don't have the capability to do. Sometimes, you know, the FBI just has deeper pockets, or DPS has more resources, and we could not be effective without them. And these task forces, they make us better. And we hope that by us being part of their task force, or their working jointly with them, that we make them better too. Nick, you can probably speak more to some of the legislative things that have happened through the task force and that side of it.
Sure. Yeah, the coordinating council, it's been an honor serving in the capacity representing the agency with Deputy Chief Swenson, with fellow colleagues from the AG's department, the governor's office, DPS, Parks and Wildlife, and Health and Human Services, and just a full, round of good agencies, and a lot of good collaboration that not only starts with the council, but goes, and we've seen it impact local communities and increase that awareness and any training opportunities. So I think it's a huge benefit, and we are thankful for the Texas legislature for recognizing each of the agencies' participation and creating the council to ensure that we're being efficient and effective across the state. And it's been a great opportunity. I think, Chief, there's a example of that on the next slide.
Yes, yeah. Yes, absolutely. And so some of you might remember this. It's not necessarily a relatively new case, but obviously, hopefully you understand we do have new cases, but we are limited on what we can discuss if they are not fully adjudicated, where this is one that's fairly well adjudicated. There's still some loose strings out there, but I feel comfortable sharing the details. Because of the legislation that was changed, we hope to be better to fight cases like this. Last session, some of the laws that changed were they raised the sexually oriented businesses. You have to be 21 to go inside there, and they have to do the E-Verify program for all employees. This situation, what we did, we worked closely, again, going back to the collaboration. We worked with Bexar County Sheriff's Department, Bexar County Fire Marshal. It basically started at an unlicensed location where an outcry was made of a human trafficking victim. One of our agents that was sitting with it at the TAG Center in San Antonio was briefed up on the case, followed up on it, found out that this victim was being forced to prostitute out of not only the unlicensed sexually oriented business, but other licensed locations. And Bexar County did a great job. We teamed up with them. We were able to arrest Eric Taylor and rescue multiple victims. I don't remember exactly how many. One thing I found unique about this case is a lot of the girls he was soliciting them on social media out of North Texas, Arlington, Lubbock area, getting them bus tickets to come to San Antonio. Of course, he would play the boyfriend role for a while, and then they needed to make him some money, and he would start putting them to work in these sexually oriented businesses. Some of them were not of age. In fact, most of them were 16, 17 years old. And what he was doing was he was getting them fake IDs and having them work in these establishments. Well, several of the establishments, there was a few, I don't know, like one or two in Houston, one or two in Austin. Most of them were in the Bexar County, San Antonio area. And what we stepped in was we had a huge role in the arrest of Eric Taylor. He was arrested for human trafficking, getting the victims the victim services that they desperately needed. And but on the TABC side of it, what we, the question was kind of hanging out there, well, what do we do with these sexually oriented businesses? Are they culpable? Did they do anything could they or should they have done anything to prevent these girls from being trafficked out of there? And what we found was employment harmful to children. And they did not do a good job of checking IDs. Some of these girls had better fake IDs than others. Some of them literally had like the paper ID without a photo on it. And these laws that are now in place that came as a result of the human trafficking task force, the coordinating council that helped push these laws through would have and will now, I hate to use the word prevent because where there's a will, there's a way, but will make it much more difficult for traffickers like Eric Taylor to use sexually oriented businesses to further their criminal activity. I really don't think these girls would have been trafficked, at least not in our licensed locations. They might have fallen victim some other way, but we would have prevented them if they had to be 21 and if they were having to do e-verify. And of course, then if the establishments are following that law, we could have prevented a lot of girls from being victimized. So this is a great example of how that collaboration can affect change for future investigations.
Yeah, and I think that's part of, the coming together under the coordinating council and sharing the, details to each of the cases, not only ours, but from other state agencies, and kind of recognizing that in the task force, holding true and putting that into a legislative packet. And ultimately, we saw change come out of this and many other examples where things needed to get tightened up in those locations. Moving into the industry that we specifically regulate and some training. Chief, did you want to touch base?
Yes, absolutely. I'll talk. I think Chief Norris might chime in a little bit. I was tasked with, when we first kicked this program off, I saw Dennis Chupe was one of the attendees on here. I know he got his fair share of going out and teaching these. And the reason why I say that is the distributors, they get together at about 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, and they start going out and delivering the beer to whether it's a convenience store, a restaurant, bar, etc. So we were there at 3 or 4 in the morning, providing a brief, probably, I think it might be up to 20 minutes now, but 15-20-minute presentation with a few slides. And the reason we did it was we recognized how important they are to helping us be the eyes and ears to fight human trafficking. They walk into these bars, restaurants, convenience stores on a regular basis, and they're allowed access to the back rooms where customers are not, and they're not law enforcement. They're not seen as a threat. So if we can educate them in what to look for, and then educate them on how to better report it, we really believe that we can get more information, get more tips, get more leads on locations that might be involved in trafficking. And I don't have accurate statistics right now. COVID is, the disclaimer for everything, because we've had 2 years where it just threw a curveball into everything. But when we initially started this, we saw a huge increase in reported reports of human trafficking. Was it a direct correlation to this? Because of course almost all of them are anonymous reporting. So it's not like they called up and said, hey, I'm a distributor with this company and I saw this. Most of it is anonymous, and that's the way we want it to be, because we really emphasize that we don't want them to feel like they're ratting out their customer, because most of these wholesalers and distributors, the retail industry is their customers, but they're humans too, and they have families, and when they see something, we expect them to report it. And I know, in talking to them and having been one of the initial instructors, there was a lot of these drivers that would come up and they would say, I never thought of that. When I was in the back, I saw this room and there was a bed back there. I just thought the manager slept back there or something. And maybe it was just the manager sleeping back there. but there's no harm in letting us know that and letting us go do an inspection and see, is it just, the manager takes a nap, or is it being used for sex trafficking? And a very, very valuable tool to get it in front of these distributors that are out there. We're looking at expanding it into more of the hotel motel workers. I know there's other initiatives out there. I think the Attorney General's office is looking at putting together some training for that. We've also put together, as you see there, some of the wallet cards that we can hand out, easy palm cards basically, that people can contact information on how to report it. And it's been a successful program. Like I said, COVID kind of put a damper on it for a little while, but we're back at it. I know up in North Texas area, we've been teaching that again.
I would just want to add to your point of not really having numbers. I do have some basic numbers or some high level numbers on the trainings that have been presented and the numbers that we have regarding that. So there's about 198 separate distributors in Texas. Of those 198, we've trained about 21 of them. And then there's approximately 289 distribution facilities. And of those 289, we've trained about 65 of those, which sounds like a small dent, but what we've got to take into consideration is that tends to extrapolate because it goes out to multiple different employees within those facilities. So of the approximately 47,000 truck drivers in Texas, we have trained 1/3 of them, which is a huge benefit whenever these folks are walking into these facilities that, we can't be everywhere at the same time. So to have these extra eyes and ears out there looking and knowing what to look for, and then reaching back out to us and saying, hey, I saw this, it didn't seem quite right. It's a huge benefit to us to have those extra eyes and ears and that force multiplier.
No, absolutely. And I think with COVID aside, I think that number would have expanded, if not been fully complete, with training all the distributors and delivery drivers in that regard.
Yes, and one thing I'd like to say is thank you to the distributors. I don't know if there's any on here today, but they actively reach out to us too. They're heavily involved in eradicating human trafficking from the places that they operate in also. So they've been another relationship that we need to maintain. It's not just our law enforcement partners or NGOs, but it's also the good majority of the people we regulate want to do the right thing too.
Absolutely. And going into some of those NGO partnerships.
So like I said earlier, we're only as good as our relationships, because I think it goes further than partnership. You almost have to know these people by name. They need to be able to pick up the phone and call you and say, hey, this is what I've got. This is an example of some of the NGOs. NGO, I think everybody knows, but non-governmental organization is what it stands for. Refugee Services of Texas, we work heavily with them. They're a statewide victim services organization. YMCA, we work heavily with them in Houston, especially because they're the grant partner with HATRA, Health and Human Services, BCFS, Allies Against Slavery here in Austin, Reflection Ministries, and we're always looking for opportunities to expand partnerships. Our information will be at the end of this, so if you are an NGO, please shoot us an email. Rachel will probably be the best point of contact, but you can shoot it to me too. And we're always looking for tips on information. And to go circle back to the top bullet there, Refugee Services of Texas and building relationships, because it leads into the next few slides. But our new victim services coordinator, Rachel Alvarez, used to work for Refugee Services of Texas. And there's going to be a case study further towards the end, Rita's, and Rachel and I and some of the other TABC agents had worked together on some previous cases. And because I like to think that she trusted me and that she knew that we would do the right thing and that we would take the information seriously, she literally, I got a phone call from her and she's like, hey, Ron, I got this case in the Valley. This is what's going on. Are you interested? And, of course we were like, not only yes, but heck yes. And it's resulted into probably one of the best cases that I've ever been involved in, and I'll go into that further later. But for now, I'll turn this over to Rachel. She did such a good job for us that we stole her from the agency she was working for at the time, and now she's with us. So Rachel, it's all yours.
Thank you, Ron. Good morning, everybody. I am so honored to be here and to talk about the great work that TABC is doing in our communities. Just a bit of background. I think I recognize some of the names on the attendees, and I received some messages already from folks that I work on the field with in different NGOs that they're attending. And I have been working in the anti-trafficking field since 2010, so about 11 years now. And in Texas, most of my work has been with nonprofits. I started with Refugee Services back in 2011 in Austin, and then in Houston, I worked at the YMCA International Services as well, and then came back to Austin where RST started branching out and creating their services statewide. After that, I moved over state and continued to work with the Attorney General's office, the Human Trafficking Transnational Crime Section, where I help with their civil team in focusing on labor trafficking cases. And yes, Ron said they stole me, but when the opportunity presented itself, I had a great working relationship with TABC prior, and I was very happy to accept the challenge as this is a brand new position, it's a brand new program within the commission. And it since has been great, and there's so much work to do, which is exciting within the agency. So with TABC Victim Services, we provide, sorry, can we just jump back to the last one? So we provide crisis and trauma response to victims, and not just victims, but we know when a victim is identified, they can be surrounded with family, with support systems. So we know we have to really care for the victim as a whole, and also witnesses in those that are working with our law enforcement, providing support in investigations and ongoing operations. So TABC had, before I came on board, they were already in the mix of identifying, recovering victims, and thankfully they were already in coalition meetings and task forces. They knew who to call for NGO support. They knew who to call for crisis response or operation support. So it made my job pretty easy coming in on board, but they did see a need for having victim services internally, just because of the extent of the work, and also having that support for their law enforcement agents. You can move forward. So the victim services benefits, we recognize that having a victim service coordinator can increase just the trust that a victim may have in the criminal justice system and working with law enforcement in obtaining justice, what justice could mean for them. So I assist during investigations. It's an added tool for the agency to increase their conviction rates. We all know that trafficking cases take quite a while to prosecute, to get to that final stage, and just walking alongside with victims and survivors in that journey of waiting, of answering continuous questions about the case, of being able to give more info, and how the memories of the crime come just sporadically, and just being there as a support is so important so that they can be ready when the time comes. They may have to face their trafficker in court. So having victim services also on the scene can free up investigators' time. I think before I came, there were some investigators that were just a bit overwhelmed with the amount of needs for a victim, and because of the great work that they do and the trust that they have, with the agents. They were calling them for everything. And we know how victims may call, survivors may call for needs, and they call the person they trust. So the agents were pretty overwhelmed with calls about, how do I apply for food stamps? How do I get this? How do I get that? So having that bridge and being able to refer out to the community is important. So the support and follow-ups that we provide is a lot of emotional support, providing victims their benefit and rights information and referrals, justice support and advocacy. I work just as any other law enforcement victim service coordinator, like Austin PD, HPD, where we are government oriented. So the confidentiality piece is important for them to understand. But we help with getting protective orders, pseudonym changes, address confidentiality, crime victims compensation, and just walking alongside, like I mentioned, in that criminal justice system, and really providing that support by referrals to the community. I can't stress that enough. Like, most of my time is spent in coalition meetings as well, and with different NGO partners. And as we help victims statewide, that case that was mentioned earlier, Blush Show in San Antonio, believe that we received help locally from BCFS, the Stop Task Force community, with their care coordination response. And then one of the victims, or a few of the victims, were from North Texas. So that's where I knew to reach Voice of Hope in Lubbock, where they can follow up care for victims. So it's important for us to really maintain those partnerships. I am based out of Houston, so I can't be everywhere at once. And that's why I stress that the NGO partners that we refer to are so important for that continual care for victims. Go to the next slide. So I was asked to share some of the numbers just to kind of paint a picture of what we're seeing on the field. And again, these are my work activities as victim services. It could look different for agents and investigations, only because I only respond to what I can. Houston may have the most numbers because I work out of the Houston office, but also I only work cases that are led by TABC. And as Chief Swenson mentioned, a lot of our agents are part of task forces, and they can work alongside investigations with other agencies. So most of my numbers come from our TABC-led work. And as you see here, Houston, the region is in numbers, but also the countries of origin, given we're close to the border. You can see the different diverse populations and the types of venues as well. Cantinas, strip clubs, bars, and unknowns are those referrals that we get that the victims may not disclose the venues they may be working at. I assist on the field in operations. I will go out with the agents, and a lot of times the work that we do, we know how hard it is to get outcries at the scene. And we understand that we may be speaking to someone that is a potential victim. So a lot of it is planting seeds. A lot of it is giving out numbers, helping them self-identify as victims if they are. And I get their information in hopes to follow up with them on a different day where it's more victim-centered. They're not being watched by others. Their emotions are heightened. And that has seemed to be successful in some of our cases in being able to at least educate those of their rights as employees, but also they're at risk if any of them are vulnerable for being at risk of trafficking. So since October, we have served up to 80 individuals, and we've had about from 80, we had about 22 disclosures of sex trafficking. And like I said, most of our work is planting seeds. And then from there, I work with the agents to really build that rapport, being trauma-informed and victim-minded, and really realizing that a victim is not going to come out and disclose their victimization in the first day. It takes time to build that support. Other referrals that I do get is from the community. I want to say the care coordination team with the governor's office statewide has been amazing to work with. Not only do they support in operations and being on standby, just last week, the YMCA in Houston, they supported. It was 3 a.m. and they were out there with us and helping get shelter for a victim. And really, it's great. I'm the only one in Houston working, but I don't feel alone because I have those NGO partners that support. I also get referrals from them. There was a case that one of the care coordinations teams, they had provided support to one of the youth victims of sex trafficking, and they had info that the youth was again working or being forced to work at another strip club. So immediately we received that information and we responded. So those that's why it's important to have these partners and to know what TABC does, and knowing that we have victim services. It could be a better way for a victim to disclose, for them to feel safe, to feel more comfortable. And the agents have been fantastic to work for and work with. I would say they have a lot of trainings on victim services and victim informed and trauma informed response. So they're going at it with a different perspective for sure, in being able to help recover and identify and hopefully restore and obtain justice for these victims.
Absolutely. I'm gonna just interrupt really quick and just we're going to go to a case study. The case study is a reflection of that effort from start to finish, with collaboration to shutting the bar down to providing services to victims. Network. And then after, we have a video that we host on our website. It's not too long, but it's definitely a good video that illustrates kind of that statewide collaboration and effort and how it relates to TABC. So I think Chief Swenson, yeah.
Thanks, Nick, and thank you, Rachel, for explaining all that. And when Rachel says, you need to know who to call, I just call Rachel, and because she has been a lifeline for us. And it started with Rita's. I mean, we had worked on some cases prior to Rita's, but I learned a lot from this case, and having that relationship was what led us to this case where she called and said, "Hey, are you interested? This is what we have, a couple of victims." Historical case. This, when I say historical, very old. We actually, it was reported by the NGO Refugee Services of Texas. Rachel herself called, and we talked a little bit about the victims. Some of the challenges was the statute of limitations, because the case was so old. Human trafficking didn't apply in a lot. It couldn't be applied, the current statute, because it didn't exist when the crimes were committed. So we had to go with aggravated sexual abuse of a child. We had to get really creative. We worked a lot with the border prosecutor, Kelly McCormick, I think was his name. It really, it worked good having that, talking with the prosecutor before we got, knee deep into this. We were already task forced up with HSI, FBI, DPS. We worked extremely close with the county attorney, Hidalgo County District Attorney's Office. It involved some asset forfeiture. We actually seized her bar and her house, 2 houses where she held the women. A lot of times, I think, a lot of times human trafficking has morphed into more of a fraud or coercion, not so much force anymore. I don't see a lot of cases where the victim, I'm not saying it's not happening, but I don't see a lot of cases where the victims are being tied up or locked in a room. But Rita is old school, and she was doing that. She had these people locked up, and it was a really horrific case that we worked here with her. We were very successful in getting her and her son prosecuted on the state charges. I lost the slide.
Should be still, is
Okay.
it still up?
Yeah, it's still up. It's just different. It we were able to get the case prosecuted, asset forfeiture on the house, the properties, and then we moved into kind of a cleanup phase with the district attorney's office. And her son was got out on bond, which was not good. He actually, well, I shouldn't say he was, because we know and what we can prove are two different things. But there was it really bothered me that he was released. She's still in jail, but we continued to investigate this because we kept getting more. If you do these investigations, one thing you'll find is it'll spider web on you. It'll grow into multiple places. We started finding additional victims in Mexico, Chicago, Houston, and it grew to such a large case that the FBI got interested. Obviously, our agent was a task force officer with the FBI, and they were assisting, and they said, look, this is expanding into other countries even. Let us take a look at it. And it was such a good case that they recently did superseding indictments, and Rita was re-indicted for 11 counts of sex trafficking, federal counts. And if you're familiar with the federal system, if she's convicted, she will do every day. It's not like the state where, you know, she's going to get out early for good behavior or anything. And her son was picked up again on federal charges, so he is not out anymore, which I sleep easier knowing that he is behind bars, and he is sitting behind jail again on federal charges now. So just a great example of how the NGO actually brought us a historic case, how we were able to work it on the state charge, used all the tools under our toolbox to, you know, whether it was asset forfeiture, administrative, canceling the permit, and then criminal, to put them both in jail, and then moved on to the case continued to grow, and the feds kind of picked it up and made it even a larger case. So I can't think of a more a better case study than this. There's still some adjudication issues, of course, because there were recently those superseding indictments were issued, but a great case and a great example of how working together can put bad people in jail and rescue victims.
If I can add, just to show that collaboration with NGOs. This case, when I first learned about it, it was through Texas Rogarian Legal Aid. So they were representing one of the victims that was just identified. And from that one, she brought in about 4 others. So the first interview was about 5 victims. So I think those partnerships within the NGO system as well as are so important, so that the victims can then trust making reports. And yeah, this is a great study. I would say recently I was able to call some of the victims and told them that the son was back in jail, and it was such a relief for them. It was a bit scary for them that he was released. We know that a lot of the traffickers use those threats, like the police can't do anything, I'm gonna just get out. And when they do come out, it kind of justifies their point. So for him to go back to jail, it was a huge win for them. And now they also can sleep well at night.
Absolutely, excellent. Nick, are you going to?
Yeah, we're just going to switch controls. Chief Norris has the video up and ready, so we're going to just give her command for a second so we can watch that. If it's getting into kind of the Q&A part, the link will be in the material after the webinar, so feel free to go back to the website and watch the video, but we'll try to watch as much of it as possible before it cuts into everyone's day.
So this is the story of a woman named Allison Franklin, who was involved and who was trafficked for a good portion of her life. And so
it really lost my innocence in my childhood. When I see these, it just makes me so angry to know that one person can just destroy your life. My name is Allison Franklin, and I am a human trafficking survivor. I was 3 years old, and my father was shot and killed Following his death, my mother, who was 19, moved in with my great-grandparents. Little did she know that my grandfather was a predator, and shortly after my father's funeral, my grandfather began raping me. With that abuse, it just launched me on a journey of self-destruction. It probably spanned over 34 years. Around 11 or 12, I started to run away from home. I found myself homeless in the streets of Houston with no food, no clothes, no place to sleep. Target was so horrible, right? Rather than this point. I was picked up by my first predator probably within an hour. He shared with me that I was really, really pretty and that it was dangerous out there. If I went home with him, I could stay with him until I figured things out. Over a very short period of time, he convinced me that we were in a relationship. I believed he was my boyfriend, but in fact that he had preyed upon me for his own sexual benefits and pleasures. I did escape and once again found myself homeless in the streets of Houston. This was a lot of activity. At that point, I was targeted by gangs. They introduced me to drugs and became a full-fledged addict. And in that time period, I would engage in commercial sex work as well as distribution of drugs. Gang members would be ordered to kidnap me, rape me, beat me, force me to prostitute. I was groomed to purchase all those drugs, sell all those drugs. We moved money, we moved guns, we moved cars, we moved people, including grooming me to recruit other women to be trafficked as well. I cycled in and out of our criminal justice system. I spent 10 years collectively behind bars with 8 felonies, nearly all incurred while under the oppression of my trafficker. So often when you're stripped of your choices from a very young kid, and then you're trafficked, and your choices are stripped again, and then you come here, and even more choices are stripped from you. And it wasn't until my 9th felony that I actually got access to meaningful services that would help me access that life.
Human trafficking is a top investigative priority, so we take it very seriously. My name is John Wall. I am major with the Texas Alcoholic Beverage Commission Special Investigations Unit. TABC has developed and organized a unit called Special Investigations Unit that specialty is in focusing on human trafficking and organized crime cases that are occurring in the licensed premise and alcohol beverage industry. Because we issue the permits to the licensed premise, we can go in and conduct inspections on a regular basis. And this gives us the opportunity to uncover signs of criminal activities, especially when it comes to human trafficking. If it's not for the work of our agents and our investigators, we're not going to uncover these victims to eradicate human trafficking by dismantling criminal organizations and networks. With helping victims like Allison, we can understand the mindset of what a victim has been through. If we can dive into that and understand their plight, then we can better engage the victims as we conduct these investigations and provide a better response.
Being able to access services that are meaningful was the turnaround for me. The real turnaround, though, however, was being identified as a victim of trafficking. Making that connection that I was a victim of trafficking makes me angry, but it also gives me hope that we have an opportunity to stand up and be active bystanders or just recognize our role that we all have room in this fight. I wish I didn't have a story to tell. I wish I had a different story to tell. But I hope that my story, inspires others to make sure this doesn't happen to someone else.
I'm Kevin Lilly, Chairman of the Texas Alcoholic Beverage Commission. It's an unfortunate fact that many victims of human trafficking are being held against their will in some of the bars, clubs, and restaurants that are licensed by the TABC. If you notice suspicious activity in a TABC licensed bar, restaurant, or other alcohol retailer, please report it immediately. You're not only helping to save the lives of the victims, you're helping to keep an important economic engine safe for business owners and customers.
Okay, so I'm going to give control back over to Nick so he can put the PowerPoint back up. But y'all heard Chairman Lilly mention reporting what you see to TABC. Now, we get the question of what happens whenever you report. But when you report, when someone calls in and reports what they suspect might be human trafficking, what we're going to do is we're going to process it and we're going to assign it to an agent who is then going to go out and they're going to conduct inspections of the establishment to look and see what they see and see if they can also concur that there might be something going on. That at that point, joint operations will begin, and that's when we start bringing in our state, local, federal agency partners to work with us. And ultimately, at the end of the investigation, of course, the goal is to, shut down the trafficking operation and to rescue the victims. One of the things that we have done, so since we started tracking this, since 2019, we have successfully been able to take action against 23 establishments for allegations of human trafficking. Now, about 50% of those had permits canceled for cause, and those 50 locations resulted in a disruption of over $40.5 million in revenue. So by removing these folks from the alcoholic beverage industry, we've taken away their ability to hide the illegal proceeds through what appears to be legitimate businesses. We've conducted over 1,000 operations that have targeted organized criminal activity. During these operations, we've encountered over 400 potential victims of human trafficking. Although several of them don't request services or several of them may not realize that they are victims, all of them are given information. All of them are given information on Rachel, on other NGOs that may be able to help them. And we reach back out to many of them at a later time to see if they have maybe changed their minds. So we are active online and with social media accounts. The video y'all just saw is on our TABC YouTube channel. Here's a few of our handles that we use. If you want to request a speaker, file a complaint, sign up for emails, provide feedback, here is the social media, the connections that will get you an opportunity to do any of those. And then finally, here are our individual contacts. Rachel, our victim services coordinator, is listed first because she might be a good place to start whenever you have questions. Or if any of y'all are in victim services yourself, she's a great resource. Ron can assist, I can assist. Nick is able to direct stuff and assist as far as where it might need to go. And I guess the main thing that we also want y'all to know is that we are very much open and we want your feedback, we want your tips, because like we said, we can't be everywhere. And so the more eyes and ears that we have out there looking and reporting suspicious activity, the better it's going to be in the long run for all of us. Any questions?
This is Todd again. That was such a great presentation. I really appreciate the time that you all put into putting this together. And this doesn't always happen, but a lot of the questions that came through the chat, you all ended up answering along the way, which is really great. So if I happen to miss any questions that came through, that's likely the reason why. We have just a few minutes left for questions. We might not have time to get to all of them, but we will be sharing this slide deck so you have some of that contact information if you need to follow up if we don't get to your question. But we'll spend the last few minutes here diving into some of these. One of the questions came in, you all mentioned various mechanisms to report suspicious activity, but on one of the slides, you specifically had a screenshot of the TABC mobile app, and there was a question about whether you could speak a little bit more about the app. Is that primarily a reporting mechanism, or what might folks find if they were to download that app and how to use it?
I'm looking for that slide because we are currently changing our record management system from what we used to call an ART system, agency record tracking system, to an AIM system. So the mobile app is not working right now. I apologize if that was in one of the slides. I thought I had removed it from everything, but I would not use the mobile app at this time because we're in the process of going through the last slide that shows a picture of our AIMS website. You see there's an arrow pointing that says welcome to the alcohol industry management system right there. That's our new record management system, and that is probably the best way to file a complaint with us. Obviously, if it's an emergency, TABC is not set up like a local police department. We don't have a dispatch system. So if you call and leave a complaint and you're expecting, TABC to respond to the emergency, that's just not the way we're set up. We work more like investigators, detectives. So if emergency situations, always call 911. AIMS, which is shown here, you can click on that file a complaint button and click that. And then, of course, DPS has the iWatch system, which is kind of the new Polaris. Polaris is still there. It's still a great resource to use, but the iWatch email and phone number is also a great way, and they will triage the complaints and then send them out to the appropriate agency. So if you call the iWatch and you talk about it occurring in a bar, it will get triaged and sent over to us. If you talk about it, it's occurring in Houston, HPD will get it. So it's a good system also. So there's various ways to report.
Well, thank you to whoever asked that question, because that's a really great clarification, and it's helpful to understand, what happens when you make the report and what are the best mechanisms to do that. There was a question that came in about identifying the best regional or local point of contact within TABC. The attendee actually asked about Williamson County specifically, but I imagine there are other folks from around the state. How would they go about figuring out who's in their part of the state, or should they reach out to someone in the state office?
Sure. Our public webpage has a directory that will take you to, actually it will try, if you let it, it will know where you're at, and it will give you the closest TABC office. Now, if you have that blocked, like you don't let it, I don't know, I'm not an IT person, but if you don't let it download your cookies or give you cookies or whatever that deal is, it might not know where your location is at, and you might have to put it in or just do a manual search that will give you the, I think that was it right there. And of course, what's up here, I mean, when in doubt, email Rachel. You can always email. You can call me. I was
going to add.
Go ahead, Rachel.
Sorry for interrupting. I was going to add, if a report or if a contact is needed to give any information or tips that involves a potential victim or someone that wants to share any victimization, I could be your point of contact, and that way I can make sure to follow up and refer that victim to local resources.
I'm going to do one more question, even though we just have a minute, and then we'll wrap up since we started about a minute late. Rachel shared something that we find to be true across the board in human trafficking, is that there's often not a disclosure initially from the victim or potential victim. And so the question is whether or not that lack of disclosure changes anything about either the potential investigation or about the services that are available to that individual.
And for the services, no, it doesn't change how I would respond. Part of my rapport building is to assess any needs and not just focus on trafficking. So if they need any basic needs like food or shelter, then I will go ahead and let them know that I can assist in that or refer them to other partners. With the investigation itself, I think the deputy could talk about that, but agents gather information, complaints from different sources, not just the victim, for us to identify different venues that could have trafficking.
I think Rachel covered it good. The only thing I would add is if they don't disclose exactly, the details of where they're coming from is one thing we're going to provide services. We're law enforcement, and we're very victim centered approach. So we're going to make sure that the victim is taken care of first and foremost. But one thing we're going to do is we want to make sure that we're staying in our lane also. If it's a domestic trafficking victim that's doesn't fall within our purview of the alcoholic beverage industry, we're going to get them the services they need and probably refer that to the appropriate law enforcement agency, whether it's DPS, the local sheriff's department, whomever, to make sure that the investigation is appropriately conducted, regardless of whether, because we know that these victims do not make outcries. That's the hardest part of working a human trafficking case, is you have uncooperative victims. And when you have uncooperative victims, it makes your case that much harder to build and prove. And but that doesn't mean we don't take it seriously. And that's probably one of the hardest things for law enforcement to understand, is that we have to put the victim first in all of these investigations and be patient with them to make that outcry, because it's going to take time. It's going to take people like Rachel repeatedly going back and contacting them before we get the information to really do a good, thorough investigation.
Thank you both. We're going to have to stop the questions there. A few things I got out of this. TABC clearly is doing a lot on this issue. I'm so happy to share this with stakeholders around the state, around training and awareness, but also now with this new position with Rachel, ensuring that potential victims have access to those services. I knew Rachel when I was a staff attorney in Houston, and she was at the Y, so it's been neat to follow your journey as you're poached organization to organization. And I think the fact that strong victim advocates, like Rachel in her prior roles, the fact that they are proactively reaching out to TABC about suspicions, I think really speaks volumes about what TABC provides in those situations. And I want to thank you all for also sharing how your investigations not only help hold exploiters criminally accountable and can lead to significant sentences, but Chief Norris pointed out also the financial impact on these enterprises, and hitting that pocketbook, we know, is going to make a big difference in this market. So just want to thank you all again for taking the time to be with us. Thank you all that joined as attendees. We do have these webinars a few times a year, so if you're not already on our list, you can visit our website. It's www.gov.texas.gov/CSTT for Child Sex Trafficking Team. We will be sending out an email to everyone that registered with a recording of today's presentation and that PDF of the slides. And as always, reach out to us or our presenters if you have any questions. So we're going to end it there, and thank you all again for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you very much.